So let's talk about some best practices for managing Google Classroom and Google Meet. Some things we're going to cover within this presentation is how to reset and disable your classroom code and meeting link, how to add, mute, or remove students, how to double check and review your class rosters, as well as some best practices regarding not sharing your code publicly and establishing some discipline procedures in your classroom as well as your school site. On the next slide, there are a lot of different amazing videos for you guys to watch at your leisure, but we're going to go ahead and jump into a few of these items. The first item is how to reset and disable your classroom codes for Google Classroom. You're going to first want to get into your classroom, and then in the right hand corner you have a little settings gear over here. Click on that gear and you will see your classroom settings. Under the area entitled General, look for the first section that says Class Code. Click on your drop down and you have some options. You have the option to display it, copy, reset, or disable. If I reset my code, it will give me a brand new code. This means anyone that leaves my classroom or is a new student into my classroom, I must provide the new code to those students. If I disable my code, it will turn my code off and it kind of locks your door basically. So that means whoever's in your classroom, they can leave out. However, no one can join your classroom without you coming back and re-enabling your code. To re-enable your code, come to your drop down, hit enable, and it will give you a brand new code. The next item that we're going to talk about today is how to reset and hide your Google Meet link. So in the same area within your settings, a little bit further down, you have the option to generate your Meet link. If it's your first time ever activating your Meet link, this button will show up for you. Click on Generate Meet Link, and it will give you a meeting link for your kids to click on and to join every day. Let's say someone has copied that link and shared it with someone, maybe their buddy in another school. You can come to your drop down and reset or change that link, and it will give you a brand new link. You can do it every single day, every hour. There's no limits. The next area right here is to show or hide your meeting link. We highly recommend, a best practice is to not show your meeting link unless you're prepared, to meet with your students. So if you want to meet with your kids, maybe it's 8 o'clock in the morning and it's time for school to start, come here, toggle it on, and the meeting link will show for your students. Once you're done meeting with them, come back to your settings, turn it off, and it is now gone off of their view. The next item that we're going to talk about is not sharing your join code publicly. So these classroom codes are private. You should not post them on a Facebook or social media site, a website, or Twitter. Any kind of social media is not safe. Of course, there are security procedures in place that will prevent any public people from joining your Google Classroom. However, anyone within the EBR ecosystem, so that means a student from another school or another classroom, can add your Google Classroom. Okay? And then also start thinking about some ways of how you will react if a student misbehaves. So maybe if they share that link with someone else, or if they're unmuting themselves constantly and saying inappropriate things, start thinking through some things that you may need to implement in your classroom for misbehaving students. The next section is how to manage students. So 2 ways to add your students. We've talked about the join code. So going back to my classroom, my join code can be found right here in my header image. So you can, of course, give your students this code and they will add your class on their sides. However, there is an alternative way to add students to your classroom. At the very top, you get some extra options. You have your classwork, you have people, and grades. I'm going to go to people. And right here, next to students, I have a little plus sign right there. I can click on that and then start typing in all of my students' email addresses. Pre-K-12 students all have email addresses. Elementary and some middle schools, they're not functioning or working email addresses. However, their login is an email address. Their email addresses are their first initial, last name, and their student ID number at ebrschools.org. To type in more than one student, simply click your little comma button and type in the next kid. Whenever you're ready to invite them all, click on Invite, And on their side, whenever they log into Google Classroom, they will see this. They will see a little join button. Show you guys how it looks. Here it is. A join button on their side to either accept or join your classroom. So if you add them manually, they will have the button to join on their side. If you give them the code, they will need to come here and type in that code themselves. Okay? Next, let's talk about how to remove or mute students in Google Classroom. So let's say Bobby is just typing inappropriate things in your comments on your classroom or posting different things, and you want to mute him. Come to your People tab. Remember, we're on our People tab. Come down here and check off that person's name. When you check off that student's name, this little drop down highlights. So let me show you guys again. I'm going to uncheck it. Right now it's grayed out. So I can't click on it. But once I check off that student's name, I get this option to click my drop down. And I can come here to mute that student. And it will tell you what muting does. So it tells you that the student can still, of course, submit work. And other people, of course, will not see it. They cannot reply to classmates' work, and they cannot comment or post. So this is an option. It only applies to Google Classroom, though. Be mindful of that. The other option, of course, is maybe a student drops. You can, of course, remove them right here by coming to your actions, clicking on remove, and it will remove that child from your classroom. So if one of your students shares your join code with another student and that student should not be in your Google Classroom, come to your roster in your classroom, double check that with JCampus, and remove any students who should not be in your classroom. All right. Next item, let's go back to our presentation. So we talked about how to join the join code and email. And we've also talked about how to just make sure that you are checking your class roster in Google Classroom with JCampus and how to remove those kids who do not belong. The next thing is Google Meets, which is a major thing. So let's talk about how to mute your students and how to remove those students. Currently in Google Classroom, the mute all button is not there. That update is coming out later on this school year. We have not received the dates just yet, but as soon as we know, we will let you guys know. So let's talk about how to just mute one individual student. So let's say you are in your Google Classroom meeting right here. And you're teaching, you're talking, you're learning, you're just living, everything's working out perfectly. However, one student, because we always have that one student, is not behaving appropriately and they're not being just good digital citizens online. And you notice that your students is unmuting themselves constantly. They may be typing inappropriate things in the classroom, etc. And you want to, of course, mute that child or remove them. You do have that option as a teacher and as the organizer of the meeting. So let me show you guys what I mean. So over here in the top right corner, I have my little participant list right here. I'm going to click on that list. And over here, let's say Bobby, my imaginary student, is not muted. I can come here and mute him by simply clicking on the mute button, and he will be muted. Okay, you can do that for any of your students in your classroom. Let's say Bobby continues to unmute himself, he says something inappropriate, or maybe he leaves and he forgets to sign out of your Google Meets. You can, of course, come here as well and remove the child or children from your meeting by clicking on the little remove from meeting button right there. It's going to confirm. Click remove, and that child will be booted out of your meeting. They can, of course, come back, so just be mindful of that. However, they will be removed from the meeting at that moment, and then hopefully your school will have additional steps in place to deal with those students that are misbehaving online inappropriately.